So my name is Lesley Van Staveren, and I have many stories to tell, but I'm going to tell one in particular now. So I've been in the building since it's opened in 1978, and I was friends with the original owners. Jumping ahead, they bought it in 78, and then probably in the early 80s, they started the gallery in the current location. I wasn't involved in the gallery, but they were a nonprofit, really avant-garde, and the two of them were driving around in Idaho on their motorcycles, and somehow or another they knew that Edward Kienholz was living in Idaho. This is before the internet, so I don't know how they found his phone number, but they called him and his wife up and said, "We're in the area, can we come visit?" And long story short, they did, and anyway, they asked him to show in the Brunswick Gallery. And now I know, just from reading about Kienholz, that he and his wife were very much of the proletarian. They didn't want to just be involved with the high-end art community in New York and the big cities. They were interested in rural art centers and stuff like that. So they actually agreed in 1983 to have an exhibit of Kienholz's work in the Brunswick Gallery. So at that time, very little was going on in Missoula. It was really primitive compared to what it is now. The art scene was much smaller. So what happened is when Kienholz came, very few people even comprehended who he was, but it was the art students and the artists. And I think it was 83, so my daughter was 8 years old, and I knew about it even though I wasn't involved with the gallery, but because I had a studio upstairs. So my daughter was in third grade, and she had just been given an autograph book. And she was beautiful, a little blonde girl in a party dress. And I bring her, and everybody's in black. Everybody's smoking cigarettes. Everybody's drinking beer. Everybody's like very arty. The room's full of cigarette smoke. She's the only child in the room. And I told her, I said, like, this is a famous artist, whatever. She brought her autograph book with her. So she approached them, and they were sitting on the ledge in the gallery, dressed in black. They looked really old to me. They were probably in their 50s, okay? But they're sitting there. And she comes up and she's like this vision, and they were so sweet with her, very kind to her, asked her questions, and she talked to them. And so she pulls out her autograph book and says, "Will you sign it for me?" And so he takes a pen, signs his signature. And, that's it. The story's over. So like 3 or 4 months later, I'm in her very messy bedroom, and I find her autograph book on the floor. And she had been bringing it to school and getting her friends to sign it, relatives had signed it. And I'm looking at it, and his signature's not there. She's about to go to bed, and I'm like, "Hey, what happened to the signature from that artist, like from Kienholz?" And she goes, "It was really messy, Mom. It wasn't a signature." And I said, "What are you talking about?" She said, "He just put a K and then a big line." And she said, "That's not a signature. I threw it away." And I was like, "Are you joking?" I was horrified. It's like, oh my God, that guy is famous. That is a signature. That was a legitimate signature. So now she's 42 or 43, and we laugh about it now, and she's an art historian, and she's seen his art in New York and in Germany and in the art books and all that. And I'm like, yeah, you threw his signature in trash. So what's really ironic is the gallery produced the poster that you saw in there, and I did not, that's not an original poster. A friend of mine that was the manager at the Brunswick for a short time and was involved with the gallery, he knew about the show, so he kindly reproduced his poster, blew it up, and he sent it to me, and he's like, "This is for you to put in the show." Well, their signatures were very faint, both Kienholz and his wife, because they had signed in ballpoint pen. And I called Dan Ruby and I said, "Are you okay?" Because I said, "I'm going to frame it, but you can't even read their signatures. Is it okay if I trace over it?" And he said, "I'm giving you the poster. Do what you want to. I don't care." So I sat really carefully, and in tracing their signatures, I was like, it was weird, like this weird connection with indigo, like, oh, it is just a line, like really intimately aware of this artist's signature. My name is Lesley Van Staveren, and my husband Max Gillian and I own the Brunswick building and the artist studios. And I won't keep you here long, but I thought I would just give a quick thank you to some very crucial people that have helped me put this volunteer effort together. Well, I'll give you a little history really quickly. In 1978, my friend Linda Bachmeister, who was a sculptor at the time, and her husband, who also was a sculptor, purchased the building to work in, originally to live in, but to work in. They quickly realized that the noise here from the railroads And the fact this was a very desolate part of town at that time wasn't conducive to home living, but work living, yes. So they invited me. I had a studio over in the Belmont. And so I came over very quickly, and then Catherine Kress and Jay Rummel moved in a few months later. So the rooms were very accommodating. They were charming, the wood floors, kind of beat up, really a good situation to work in. And over time, Bob and Linda moved away. They had a couple of managers for the building, the first of which we think was a poet named Emily Ramsdale, who has work on the wall in there. She lives in Oregon now. She may come for the August 2nd reading. And then after her, a gentleman named Dan Ruby, who was an art critic. He became part of the nonprofit first version of the Brunswick Gallery that Linda and Bob were on. And Dan was a critic. So we have the distinction of him having written several articles at that time that were published in Art Week, which is a very influential arts magazine back in the 80s, including an infamous show of Edward Kienholz, who the poster for that show, there's a reproduction of it in the room. Anyway, after Dan left, I became the manager because Linda and Bob had moved away. And then they moved successfully from the West Coast to the East Coast. And during that time, I was predominantly renting to my friends, people that I knew in the art community, and by word of mouth. So it was majority of people were visual artists, but luckily we had a few writers that started coming in. Percentage-wise, probably 20% writers and about 80% visual artists. And every once in a while, an oddball musician or a cartoonist. Is Stuart Weber here? Stuart Weber was actually a cartoonist. Now he's a classical guitarist. I think his career as a cartoonist in the building pushed him into the classical music. So he's coming up from Bozeman. He may be here tonight. But in any case, in '94, it became obvious that Linda and Bob were not moving back. And it made sense for someone that lived here that was part of the art community to take over the building. So I purchased it from Linda and continued with the agreement that I would continue to do the same thing. And so that's what's happened is 40 years later, the building has been occupied over and over again by writers and artists and musicians. Some people as briefly as 2 or 3 days. Some people as many as 20 years. Jay Rummel was here for 20 years. And so it's really rich with history. I just want to say the show is not every single person that went through the building. It was very difficult to locate some of the people, and some of the people just have evaporated because our records are kind of scanty for the earlier years. If you know of someone that had a studio that was not notified, or you have their contact information, let me know. The show is up till August the 18th, and it will be open Thursdays from 2 to 6, Fridays from 2 to 6, and Saturdays from 2 to 4. So or 10 to 4, or 10 to 2, sorry, like during the market times. And then we may have a closing party on August 18th if I'm still surviving. So, which brings me to the point that as I've been saying to people, I'm not a nonprofit. If I was a nonprofit, I'd have a staff and I'd have funding. I'm not a for-profit. I was a for-profit, I would have employees and I would be getting a nice percentage of the sale. So I'm sort of like an insane person that has dragged her really good friends and her poor husband and a number of really wonderful artists into helping me out. And so I'm going to just read their names really quickly in alphabetical order. Joel Baird, who had a studio here, who is the head of MCAT. John Cowspeak, who works at the MAM, at the Art Museum, and loaned us the pedestals. Marianne Forrest, who is the person that suggested to me in 1994, you ought to talk to Linda and see if she'll sell you the building. I will be forever grateful. Annie Gard, who has painted for me repeatedly, who did a beautiful job on the trim in here, and has used the gallery for a staging area for many times. Joyce Gibbs, who suggested that I approach Rock and Rudy's for the full-page ad on the back of the Independent. She's our model for the Patty Canyon Ladies Salon, which has showed here for at least 20 years every August or September. My husband, Max Gilliam, which I can't even describe how helpful. He's kind of shy. And then the Historical Museum at Fort Missoula, which is loaning us this memory tent, which I urge you, if you would like to have your memories of either working here, exhibiting here, or attending an event here, because we've had some outrageous events here over the past 40 years, especially featuring Jay Rummel with vodka punch parties in the studio and people breaking down the door to get into the gallery and things like that. But you can go over there, and Mark Moss, who I would like to thank as well, is handling that tonight and may also help me when we also may have the same opportunity on the August 2nd reading night, if you want to come back, if you think about something like that. And MCAT tonight is doing the recording here. We're going to put together like a half-hour short video to commemorate this, including interviews with the artists and the events and a little bit of other things too. Bruce Miklas for the ad on the back of the Independent. My mother, Carol Millar, for urging me to do artwork from the time I was 4. Laura Millen, who has been a very graceful friend in the art community with profound influence, like doing this kind of thing regularly. The Missoula Art Museum, which is a cornerstone to me of opportunities for the cultural community here. Jennifer Parker, who has the studio adjacent to here, who 11 years ago we had lunch together because she's had the studio here quite a distance. And we said, let's have a 30th anniversary show. And then we never got it off the ground. Partly because the internet was not as pervasive and Facebook wasn't as pervasive. So we really didn't know how to track people down. So this last year, I talked to her, I was like, want to do a 40th? And she said yes. And if she had not said yes, I probably wouldn't be doing this. So I really appreciate the help she's given. Virginia Rutherford, I don't know whether she's here, but she has absolutely knocked herself out to help with all the organization, which is stuff that I'm not familiar with, and hanging the show very beautifully. I woke up 5 nights ago before we started hanging it, and I went, oh my God, I never told anybody what they could do or what to do. The only requirement was that it was small. And I went, it could look like a bad version of a county fair. And I didn't tell that to anybody but Virginia. I'm really nervous because we hadn't opened the boxes. But once we started opening the boxes, we were all very reassured because most people are really talented and put thought into what they do. And they had total latitude about what they wanted to share with the community. So but it's Virginia's talent to pull together so many disparate elements. And Dave Stewart helped paint this building and was really knocked himself out to get it done for the opening, and that was really critical because if you drove by this winter, you probably saw that it looked kind of scary, and so he helped with that. And last but not least, my friend Linda Bachmeister, who came from Virginia, not only to be at the opening, but was really instrumental all week long in hanging the show and doing all sorts of tasks. I'd like to conclude if you would like to say a word.
Luckily, you've kind of told my story, so I'm not going to repeat it. But my life in Montana was extremely important to me. I think I met some of the most important people in my life that are still my dear friends. I went back to Virginia, which is where I grew up, got involved in the place called the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts. I love supporting the arts, even though I'm also a sculptor. And I now support, I'm bringing this up because I'm assuming that most of the people here are writers or artists. You can also be a composer. I give away a grant each year to a Montana person because when I lived here, no one got out of the state of Montana.
No.
And so now, a lot of Montanans are, applying to this wonderful place. So please look it up, go for it. Lesley is one of the first ones to have come. And it's, this is a great, 40 years ago. And I'm also celebrating my 40th wedding anniversary a couple of years ago.
Congratulations.
So a lot happened 40 years ago.
Yeah.
But you never know what you're going to start. You never know what's going to happen.
Absolutely.
It's just really cool that this venture is still going strong.
Thank you. The last thing I want to tell you is when I was visiting the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts last November, and the residency program is pretty small, it's about 20 people, and you eat together at dinner time. And I'm sitting at a table with a guy from Germany and people from the New York State and people from Virginia and all over, some people writers, a Chinese man that's a really talented composer, and we're talking, and I went, and I'm so disturbed about how difficult this country is currently. There's a lot of really turbulent times. And I was going, this is where I feel comfortable. This is the international community of artists. And I don't feel that like that means that you have to be a writer or artist or a painter, but it's a broad concept. It's my club, and I'm inviting you all to be part of it. Because it's a better place to be. I'm convinced that if you did a statistical analysis of the larger arts community, there would be less murders, there would be less crime. I think we're a happier group of people because we're getting to express the best of being human. So that is kind of what motivated me to do this, is to celebrate that. So thank you. Thanks a lot. Yeah.
I want to add to what you said because I always think art can save the world.
Yeah.
And I really think that on so many levels it can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's it. So you're a member of that club.
My name is Linda Wachmeister, and I have not lived in Missoula for a very long time. I originally came out here in the early 70s for graduate school and met my husband today many years ago. We actually just celebrated our 40th anniversary, which the building is also just celebrating. So he was from California, and I went for a year to California, and I said, I've got to go back to Montana, so I drug him back here. And that's when I bought this building. And I owned it for 16 years, and Bob and I lived upstairs, and our studios, we're both sculptors, and our studios were downstairs, and then we started to fill the rest of the bedrooms upstairs, because that's what it was, originally a hotel, with other artists. And Lesley was my dear friend. I think she was the second person I met here in Missoula. So I owned the building for 16 years, and we had a gallery, I think for about 5 years, but we have to research that. We had a lot of great shows. And then Bob and I moved to Seattle, and then we moved back to Virginia. So I felt it was better for the building to let it go, and I sold it to Lesley then, with the understanding that she would continue with this venture of keeping the building for artists and writers, because I think there used to be more buildings in Missoula than there are now. I think there's very little space now for artists. So it's pretty wonderful that we're celebrating 40 years, and we have so many people here, and the artwork, about almost 90 pieces of work representing all the people that have been in this building for the last 40 years. So it's fun to be back, because I haven't been back for 5 years, so it's great.
Welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you.
My name is Christy Hager, and I am a painter here in Missoula. I have had three different studios in the Brunswick building, and you start out getting your foot in the door by getting a small studio, and then as the bigger ones become available, you can kind of work your way into a bigger studio. And my last studio was right in this, right there, that big plate glass window. And I just love the community in the building, because you didn't really visit each other's studios so much, but when you finished painting, you might, for a morning, you might meet on the steps here and eat lunch together, or just have some interchange that was a daily thing, and it was really nice. And but before I had a studio here, I would come to openings, and Lesley always had a Christmas show. And I do remember the first one I came to, the gallery was so full, and it was snowing out, and we were standing outside the plate glass you know, with our noses against the glass, watching the goings on, because there were performers. People would play music, because there was a musician in the building, Jay Rummel, and then there were poets who would do readings. So it was a little, and Lesley would do a performance. And then there, of course, there was the art, and all the studios in the building were open, so you could walk around the building and go into different people's studios. So those are my really fond memories. In short, I have others, but those really stick with me. Those Christmas shows, and just being able to visit with fellow artists and writers in passing.
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm Robert Stubblefield, and I'm a writer, and I worked here at the Brunswick building back in the mid to late 1990s, and Lesley provided a relaxing, inspiring space, and it gave me a great place to work that was part of a community, but also provided the solitude I needed to work as a writer. And that's a rare combination to have in any environment. And Lesley and Max have just been so vital to the art and literary communities here in Missoula over the years. And I'd love to work at the Brunswick again sometime. And everyone I know who has worked here has not only produced some of their best work here, but also just really enjoyed the experience and the environment. So thanks, Lesley.
Hi, I'm Nancy Rishoff. I'm an artist here in Missoula. I was at the Brunswick about a year ago. I was there for a couple months, and it was a great experience. I'm a plein air painter for the most part. Started painting in plein air in 2014 because of the Missoula Arts Council was doing a plein air event. It was art on the river. Yeah, so it got me hooked.
Got you hooked on that medium, huh?
Yeah. And I paint with acrylics and watercolor. No oil, too stinky. It's a paint out, and you're painting outside in plein air, which means it's a French pronunciation. It's called in plein air, is how it's pronounced. But if you say painting outside, most people understand that. Not painting a building, but painting on canvas, you know.
My name is Rebecca Sobin, and I'm a painter here in Missoula. And I didn't start out as a painter. When I rented space at the Brunswick, which Lesley so gracefully rented to me, it was a very small space, and I was a photographer at the time. And so I didn't have too much work and processing to do in this space. And so I outgrew it rather rapidly. And so I was in the space somewhere between 6 and 8 months, I believe, just a couple of years ago. And that led up to having a show at the ZAC. And after that, I was like, I can't fit in here. I started painting. I started with acrylics. I now work in oil and cold wax. And I'm enjoying it very much. I still do photography, but not at the level I was doing it before. And I'm happy with my new medium. And I would rent space here again if I could find a big enough spot that was open, but it's a very popular place to rent art space. And while I was here, the room I had cattywampus floors, and it was a very cool room. It was a corner room. I could see out, and it had windows. It's important. So when I was doing photography, I started looking at this external world from a different viewpoint. I started with color photography and ended up doing black and white, and those shadows and angles in black and white basically lent itself more to the abstract. And I was down in Arizona for a while. When I moved back to Montana, I started painting. After I had my photography show, it was mainly in black and white, and it was how I merged that internal and external world, and it was how I moved from one place to another, so from Arizona back up to home, to Montana. And all of a sudden, I started seeing things differently, and I was able to translate some of those shapes and colors and objects and ideas from my internal world and also from the natural world
from the photography aspect of it, I started seeing things in a different way and started painting them. And so I am an abstract oil and cold wax painter these days.
Hi, my name is Chris Franzen, and I'm a visual artist who has had a gallery in the Brunswick building this last year. My studio burnt down last summer, almost exactly a year ago, and Lesley stepped in and called and said, "You need a space, you're an artist, I've got a space." And so the gallery that the show is happening in now has been my studio for almost a full year, and will be my studio again after the ladies' salon finishes in September. And so I'm delighted to be in the Brunswick building. I'm probably the newest person here. I'm not as famous as many of these wonderful artists, but it's just a joy to be in this building and to work down here in downtown Missoula. So thank you.
My name is Catherine Kress. When I was at this building, I had another name. I called myself Catherine Pearson White then. I married later on and called myself Catherine Pearson Kress. Moved to this building, I had a studio at the Belmont building, which is now, I think it's low-income housing. It's above Charlie B's, sort of. There were quite a few artists in that building at the time. They were going to close it down, and I knew I had to find a new studio. I was friends with Linda Wachmeister when she and Bob Strini bought this building. Bob, I think, had the studio I then moved into for about a year. So I must have moved in here about 1979. I worked here for, I don't know, maybe about 8 or 9 months before I knew that. So the residents of the Belmont were then starting to be moved out. And my friend Jay Rummel, who had a studio right across the hall from me in the Belmont building, needed a studio. And I think that the way the whole thing started was that I said to Jay, you know, you can come over and set up your easel and do some painting in my studio because I've got lots of room. Well, over the next 12 years, the amount of space that I had went from here to here to here to here to here to here to me moving out because Jay just gradually took over. And Jay, what I call Jay a hoarder, maybe not really, but he had a lot of stuff. And I mean, he had a lot of stuff. And he wasn't really good at cleaning up after himself. And over that period of time, I watched Jay do a lot of work, and he watched me do a lot of work, and a lot of stuff happened. There were a lot of people who came through the building and came through our shared studio. I left every day because I had a job. I would leave at around 4 or 5, depending. And Jay and his friends would sort of gradually take over the evening shift at the Belmont. So there was a lot that went on that I missed out on, but I heard about it the next day. When I was here, I was playing around with doing some New Age imagery. I did a big switch at that point in time. I had been doing fabric work, and I just got tired of it. I just wanted to quit, or a sewing machine broke, or something like that happened, and I decided that I wanted to go back to my roots as a draftsman, but I wanted to work in color and paint. I started working on 55 by 48-inch pieces of American etching paper and doing pastels. And my imagery became, I had as a child painted horses. I was one of those little girls who had a drawing tablet with her everywhere I went. And I was always drawing, and some of the drawing that I was doing was of horses. So I thought, I wonder what it'd be like to go back as a grown-up and just explore that whole imagery of horses and see what happens. So I was working on some very large, very colorful pastel paintings of horses, and I worked on those until I moved out of the building and into the 90s, late 90s, and I started working on, I went back to painting then. I taught myself how to do sumi painting, only I did it with oil paint, and I drew the deer in my yard in oils, and then I did oil paintings. I started working on sheetrock after I had been doing interior design for a few years. I fell in love with the materials, and I'm working on sheetrock still. I started working on sheetrock coated with plaster, and I would manipulate the plaster all sorts of different ways, and then I would preserve it by coating it with layers of beeswax. And I gradually just started drawing and painting on the plaster and then working with beeswax. Now I'm working with graphite. I do diptychs a lot right now with graphite on one side, which is sort of the draftsman in me. Now I'm doing beeswax on either half of the same piece or half of the diptych, and I'm starting to work gold and copper leaf into my work. And so that's sort of the evolution of my work as an adult, but most of that latter, I stopped. I worked on the horse pieces until the late 90s, and I left the Brunswick, I'm gonna guess, at 88.
Hi, I'm Megan Haney, and I make electroplated resin jewelry, which is copper-plated resin jewelry. I use like nature and bits of lichen and branches and all sorts of interesting stuff like that, or I mimic natural stone. I make jewelry mainly, but here I have my first like sculpture piece that is actually like a little pyramid and with dream catchers and branches and stuff. So yeah, super excited to have a piece here. Getting a studio here was very spur of the moment, and I was in love with this building for so much longer than I had a studio. Like, just idolized this place forever. It ended up being a brief time that I was here because I kind of underestimated how badly I needed a sink. Like, I didn't have a sink in my studio, so that was a bummer to have to leave, but it all worked out, and I'm just like so happy that we were here for the time that I was. Like, it was really cool. I'm just happy to be here. Yeah.
My name is Carolyn Patterson, and I'm a writer from Missoula, Montana. And I have several experiences, lots of experiences with the Brunswick Gallery, and I have great admiration for Lesley for continuing the work of the Brunswick Gallery. One of my first experiences with the Brunswick Gallery was with the Missoula Writing Collaborative. I'm now the executive director of the Missoula Writing Collaborative, but at the time I was working as a writer in the schools with the collaborative, and so I would come to the office here and fill out paperwork or talk with the director at the time, Megan McNamer, or Cheryl Nothey. And I loved the feel of this building. It was, you can tell a building that where artists are because there's kind of a loose, vibrancy, and there was, people were moving back in the halls, and the talk was kind of loose and casual, but people are serious and doing artwork. And that was a wonderful, that was a part of the, I guess I'd call it serious play that, that writers have together. That was one of my experiences here, and one that I love the sense of, I love the sensibility of the building. Also, my husband, Fred Hafley, who is also a writer, and he was unable for health reasons to be here tonight. He had an office here, and he really loved it because he was able to work here. We had young children at the time, and so it was really difficult for him to work at home because our house was really small and really noisy, and he loved being able to get away and to work in this office. And it's a great thing that Lesley has done to provide office space at a really reasonable cost for writers. We wouldn't have been able to. It would have been very, very difficult for him to work in those years when our kids were really small. And so he was able to complete a novel here, and that was a great gift at the time.
Hey, I'm Mark Moss. I run and organize Tell Us Something, and Lesley asked me to come down and record people's stories today. And so I'm recording people's oral history stories as a part of the celebration of the Brunswick and their experiences being artists at the Brunswick, or renting studio space here, or being participants as members of the community. And the Historical Museum at Fort Missoula has provided this memory booth, and I'm just manning the booth so that people feel comfortable recording their stories. That's what I'm doing. Thanks.
My name's Cindy Knudsen. I did have a studio in the Brunswick on the main floor. I have a lot of different experiences with the Brunswick over time, beginning in the 80s. Probably mid-80s, I met my ex-husband at the Missoula Club, and we took a little walk to his writing studio here at the Brunswick, Steve Saroff, and that was on the second floor. And then later on, after some time, he shared his photo studio upstairs with me. So I learned to develop black and white photos and enjoyed taking photos and developing images. At some point around that time, we went to a few of Jay Rummel's parties on the first floor, and one of the times I bought an amazing print from Jay for $25. And it was a music / cheap beer party. I mean, there were a lot of people singing and playing, and everyone was happy and drunk. Anyway, that was one of my really, really happy Brunswick memories. Later on, after I had children, and I was painting a lot, and I was painting a lot throughout this whole process. I had a studio, ironically, in the same space that Jay Rummel was in. So years later, I had a painting studio there. Currently, I'm painting. I also write poetry. I have a short poem that I wrote inspired by some of my time at the Brunswick Gallery, which I'll read in a moment. Yeah, I continue to paint. I have a painting in the Brunswick Gallery right now, and currently have a studio at the Saratoga. So I'll read my poem. The poem is called "The Missoula Club Before You, the Brunswick With You." When we met, I tried to tell you I had a full, long life at the Missoula Club before I met you. My friend and I walked evenings across the bridge, our preferred dress vintage, the cadence of our step in time with her fluent French. She met him there, another genius drunk. Within months, she tried to get away from him. He used her key into our apartment and scribbled E.E. Cummings-inspired poetry covering her pink walls. She took him back for half a decade, their house together, a blue view of Puget Sound. Years later, you walked into the bar, drinking Miller and cracking peanuts, your green cashmere sweater, sleeves too short, hair outgrown the last relationship. My maternal instinct ignited. You invited me to your studio by the railroad tracks, seduced me with your words, maiming me and shifting my life forever.
My name is Rachel Simpson, and I used to have a studio here in the Brunswick Gallery. I remember many years ago walking or driving past the gallery and seeing Jay Rummel in there working and seeing his pieces in different states of being produced there. And so I was always curious about this place. And then I found out that Lesley owned it, and I knew her and Max, and so I came and said, hey, you got studio space here. It was the first time I ever had my own studio space, and the reason I was able to have it was because my dear friends Christine Bile, who's a writer, and Gabe Travis, who is also an artist, they bought me the first month's studio rental for a birthday present. And I was so happy and so thrilled. And I live within walking distance of here, or bicycle riding. And there was something so special about being able to come every day on foot or on bike, and something about having the space here and just that far from my house. I was just singing with creative ideas. When I got in the studio, I would kind of get stuck. I did create a show for my time in there. Some pieces I still have, and I love them, but I'm not sure it was that successful of a show just because I need to do more and more art, which is what everybody needs to do. And we have all kinds of reasons, because we have to work and take care of kids and do all those things. But I mostly just want to say, if you have any interest in doing anything creative at all, just do it, because there's nothing more satisfying in the whole world than just having a chance to express yourself creatively. And if you have children, get them to start drawing and doing whatever they want to do, however young they are, because it will give them something in their life that nobody else will be able to give them. They won't be able to buy, and they'll always have it for themselves. After